One thing I find very problematic in this philosophy is this incredibly, kind of sharp dichotomy that you create between, kind of business and government, as if they're not almost always working very closely in tandem. So to make this bizarre separation between governments and markets, it's just not real.
Acapulco, Mexico. This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. We're doing a little bit of a different format today, not just an interview with just one person. We're going to have a bit of a discussion. I don't call it a debate. I don't really like debates that much because I really think that most of these things just need to be conversations where we're not trying to win the debate. We're trying to understand what the other person's saying and trying to see if they have things that we haven't thought about and have better evidence for why some things would work better than others. So I have Sterlin Lujan, the psychologic anarchist. He's been on before, I think a couple times probably on Anarchast. He's spoken in Acapulco a couple times. I see him at a lot of cryptocurrency conferences. He works with Bitcoin.com now. And he also is quite into psychedelics. And that's how he met our other guest today. It's Daniel Pinchbeck. He's quite a prolific author. He's the author of Breaking Open the Head, a psychedelic journey into the heart of contemporary shamanism, the return of Quetzal. I can never pronounce this name, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. He's co-founder of the web magazine Reality Sandwich and Evolver.net, and if Wikipedia is correct, edited the publishing imprint Evolver Editions. So he's written quite a bit, and apparently Sterlin and Daniel met at a event in Mykonos, Greece, which is a great place, by the way. I love all those Greek islands, very anarchist. And it was actually at a psychedelic-related conference. They're both really into psychedelics. If you've watched our past Anarchast with Sterlin, that's how he actually sort of became an anarchist, is sort of through psychedelics in some respects. And Daniel's very into these things as well. So they got along really well on that. And apparently, as they got discussing, they found there were some differences in some of their beliefs about how things should be if we want the world to be a better place. And we thought, well, why don't we talk this out, on camera, on YouTube and other decentralized platforms as well, because we'll probably get shut down on YouTube pretty soon. And so we want to have them both on. So thank you both for being on with us. And I'm going to actually start with you, Daniel, because as I mentioned, I know Sterlin very well. I just met you today, so I don't know you that well at all. And so why don't you just give us a bit of your background and about your beliefs?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I'm essentially an author. I've written a number of books. Breaking Open the Head was the first one. That was about psychedelic shamanism. I was visiting tribal cultures in Africa and Amazon. I'm very interested in indigenous knowledge systems, their abilities to have sustainable societies over long periods and so on. I then wrote a book called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, that was essentially having had sort of mystical experiences, shamanic experiences, psychic experiences through writing the first book. I became more aware that we had to take thought systems of indigenous cultures more seriously than people generally did. So the second book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, looked at prophecies from around the world about this time being a time of tremendous transformation and so on. Most recently, I wrote a book called How Soon Is Now, which essentially looks at the ecological crisis that we're facing as a species as a rite of passage or initiation for humanity as a whole. And beyond just reviewing the evidence around what's happening environmentally, I sought to develop a model, like a design model for how we would have to redesign human society in the short term to deal with the threats that we've unleashed. And unfortunately, that book came out 2 years ago, which means I had finished writing it 3 years ago-ish. Every ecological indicator just seems to be getting worse and worse, well beyond what I wrote about in that book. So if you read the IPCC report from the UN, it's terrible. Even the U.S. government has issued a report under the Trump administration, which is pretty terrible also. And in fact, from my evidence, I would say these reports are still too conservative in terms of missing the possibility of nonlinear feedback loops in the climate system. Because we know there have been periods of very excessive and intense warming. For instance, about 15,000 years ago, at the end of the Younger Dryas period, the climate flipped to 10 degrees Celsius warmer in what was about a decade. And now we know that these things happen often because of feedback loops that kind of like feed into each other. So right now we're seeing forest fires around the world. Those are turning carbon sinks, releasing CO2 back into the atmosphere. And we're seeing, deforestation in the Amazon. We're losing 7 football fields a minute of the Amazon rainforest to, essentially extractive and predatory practices of deregulated capitalism, to be honest. And we know that the Amazon in itself provides 20% of the oxygen that we breathe. So if we lose too much of it, we won't be able to breathe oxygen anymore on this planet. So yeah, I identify as a mystical anarchist. I would love to see an evolution of human society where we would have regenerative and resilient, self-sufficient communities meshed together into harmonious bioregions, and that itself in a planetary framework where everybody could live peacefully and harmoniously. But I think that a lot of what I hear in the libertarian discourse, I find very troubling and very problematic. And when you trace some of those perspectives back, you find there's actually, I would say, some very negative forces in society that have been pushing and promulgating this agenda. For instance, there's a book called Dark Money by a New Yorker writer, Jane Mayer, and she looks at the Koch brothers and their involvement with John Birch Society and Heritage Foundation and so on, and really hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars spent over decades to promulgate a certain type of philosophy short-term benefit for wealthy people.
Okay, yeah, very interesting, and that is one of always a major issue when it comes to anarchism is how are we going to deal with ecological issues, and so this is definitely a topic of great debate. Sterlin, do you want to respond to that and maybe give a bit of your background as well, if you like?
Sure, I'll start with my background. So I started this whole journey into anarchism, into thinking about ways that we can alter the paradigm in order to heal society, in order to help us move on to a next level through the process of taking psychedelic drugs, through learning and understanding the nature of the state by experiencing being assaulted and harmed by the state directly. So if anybody hasn't heard of my background before, back in 2009, I was arrested, essentially kidnapped for possession of MDMA and cocaine, about 500 pills of MDMA, about 30 grams of cocaine. So I was arrested, I was kidnapped, and then I was held for ransom for several $1,000s to get out of jail. It was a very, very difficult time in my life. And bear in mind, this was after I took psychedelics. When I had taken psychedelics, a glimmer or a hint of something is greatly wrong erupted in my mind's eye. And the first thing I thought was, this drug actually made me wake up. It spurred me to start reading books, not just for escapist pleasure, but for trying to understand the world on a deeper, more fundamental level. And that also made me realize that if this drug helped me do this, why is it blanket banned in society? Why are people indoctrinated or programmed to believe that it's an absolutely bad thing and that it'll ruin your life? So I already had sort of a hint of libertarianism or anarchism or even some degree of left libertarianism in that sense. And I started giving the drugs to my friends and to family members to help them wake up, to help deprogram them. So I kind of became a quasi shaman in that degree, although I don't identify as a shaman, but trying to help wake people up, use it for medicinal purposes is sort of where I began. And then shortly thereafter, of course, I was arrested, I was kidnapped. And after that happened, I started finally started reading the libertarian and anarchist writers, namely Murray Rothbard. I studied his book quite intently called the Manifesto, Libertarian Manifesto. It's a new manifesto for liberty, I believe is the title. Anyway, I read the book and it totally altered my perspective. And I realized that what had happened to me was not my fault at all. I should not have been kidnapped. I should not have been accosted by the state. And I realized at that point the nature of the state, that it's just a criminal organization. It's an organization of thugs who are out there to further their own agenda by using this illusion of power that we refer to as government or the state. So after that occurred, I finally realized what I characterized as the truth, and I started pushing forward into the future to help change people's minds about the nature of the state and try to push for creating a situation where we have absolute freedom in culture. And that's been on my mind ever since. Now, I guess I'll get into a little bit of what Daniel said, and I just want to say off the bat that I'm really, I don't want to use the term neutral, but I'm not as concerned with the environmental or ecological problems as Daniel is. I'm actually a bit skeptical about anthropogenic global warming, but we're not here really to discuss those issues, because I think that if those are problems, and clearly we do have some issues that need to be looked at and resolved, but I think if there is a problem there, we really need to rely on the efficiency of the free market, of capital accumulation, and of individuals who can handle those problems with more efficiency and without the necessary use of violence as a solution. Because if our ultimate goal is to actually save the world from any kind of problem, be it ecological, be it self-inflicted or whatever, we have to leverage our own ability to cooperate to solve those problems. And using government or any kind of governance that relies on violence is not a method for cooperating with other people to solve problems. And it actually just exacerbates any kind of problem that we're trying to solve. Because if our ultimate goal is to save the world, you don't save the world by first harming other people, by putting guns to people's throats and telling them this is how the problem should be solved, or this is how we should save the world. So
I've heard you make this,
Sure. No, go ahead. We can continue the discussion from here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's like a number of just enormous problems in what you're saying. Well, first of all, I don't, and it's very much in this libertarian ethos to be extremely skeptical of global warming and climate change. But honestly, the scientific evidence is just fucking overwhelming. I mean, there's hundreds of scientists around the world. You can look at what's happening to the Arctic. You can look at the fires in Malibu. We're losing 100 to 200 species a day out of 8.2 million estimated species on the planet. That means we're losing 10% of the Earth's remaining biodiversity every 10 to 15 years. You can look at ocean acidification. Nobody argues with that. The oceans are something like, I used to know this exactly, I think it's 30% more acidic, the entire body of the ocean than they were 40 years ago, because they're absorbing a huge amount of the industrial CO2. We're putting 1 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every hour, along with other pollutants and greenhouse gases. And we have very, very elaborate models. So it's like, I don't understand why people like you who accept science in some areas would have this ideological. For me, there just seems to me in a lot of what you say, an ideological kind of barricade that you've erected. And a lot of it seems to come from this one personal experience of having this very unfortunate experience, which I also totally disagree with, where the government seized you. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the government. I don't like the military-industrial complex. I think there are many problems with the government. But I also think that we have to see that government is historically about a kind of negotiated compromise between the ruling, the rulers and the rule. Fortunately, I would rather have no rules, but we're authoritarian structures that also, committed violence, whether it's the Inquisition or wars or conquest or, subjecting serfs, and then there were revolutions in the late 18th century, the shift to bourgeois governments that did offer people some level of protection. And then those negotiated compromises, developed during the 20th century. So you had the New Deal, you had social services, you had welfare, you had healthcare. Then you have societies which I would say are much more advanced than our society, like Scandinavian societies, which are much more about taking care of their population, keeping them healthy. And to do that, they have a pact, kind of a social pact, that they allow for higher taxation, so that everybody can be part of the boon and the benefits, recognizing that. And for me, what you put forward goes so against the essential and intrinsic kind of realization one has in psychedelics, which is how interconnected we are, interdependent we are as a species. So just to say that, we have no responsibility for other people, that regulation, makes no sense. I mean, market forces are also coercive and also violent. I mean, corporations will do anything to make profit. You can look at like what Texaco did in the Ecuadorian Amazon, spewing cancer-causing materials, devastating, the environment, all over the planet, Monsanto, like all of these companies are perpetrating these horrors on the planet. And I feel that this libertarianism, which is a very American phenomenon, is just something that there's an ideological barricade and this overly fundamental belief that markets can solve problems without human intervention. The market is not God. Humans have the right to put restrictions and regulations on things that otherwise just go out of control. And that is kind of what we have right now. We have a capitalist system that's out of control and is perpetrating tremendous horrors on the planet.
Let me jump in here for just a bit and respond to a few of those things. As far as skepticism about global warming and things like that, I'd actually prefer if we don't get too much into that because that's a whole other topic. I'd prefer to talk about the solutions to ecological problems because we can all agree there's definitely major ecological problems in the world today. But just briefly on that, you mentioned that hundreds of years ago, the temperature just went up 10 degrees all of a sudden, that we've gone through ice age.
15,000 years ago.
Okay. So this happens normally, apparently, on this planet. This is, we've had ice ages, things like that. When Al Gore came out with his...
That's not exactly. I mean, it happens because of something like a meteorite crash or a volcano eruption. And then the fact is that causes all these other feedback loops to happen. So, for instance, we know there's huge, hundreds of gigatons of frozen methane under the Siberian peat frost and under the Arctic. So when temperature goes past a certain point, that starts to erupt. And you can look at the Arctic scientists who are already measuring like Arctic pools where you can light them on fire as the methane erupts. If that starts to erupt in such large quantities, that's one of the key feedback mechanisms that then leads to a sudden spike in the climate. So essentially, we didn't know how delicate and fragile the climate was. We're just learning that over the last 20 or 30 years. And the evidence is that it's much more fragile, much more prone to these sudden spikes. And if we did have a 10 degrees Celsius pop in a decade, that would be curtains for most of humanity. Maybe some small bands would survive in the mountains of the Peru or something. But for the most part, agriculture would fail. We'd have mass refugees, then we'd have wars, then we'd have extinction.
Yeah, but even looking at the global warming thing, like Al Gore said in 2009 that polar ice will be gone in 5 years. We're now 10 years later, and there's tons of polar ice. My friend just got stuck up there this summer, in the summertime, in all the ice and things like that. So say
there are tons of polar ice, to me, is such a kind of flabby way of reckoning with something that's so significant. I mean, you can look at what these Arctic scientists, there's so much evidence. I can recommend 15 books. I mean, there's a preponderance of the world's scientists. I mean, James Hansen was the head of NASA's climate science division. Now he was chaining himself to the White House lawn because as a scientist, he recognized that we've reached a point where we're tipping the balance to our own extinction. And that's become so much more evident in the next few years. For you to make a comment about, there's a lot of ice in the Arctic, to me is such a kind of well,
that's what Al Gore said, right? And he said within 5 years there will be no more ice, and there's lots of ice. So he was wrong on that.
The entire North Polar ice cap during some of the summer months could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years.
Al Gore even a scientist. It doesn't matter what Al Gore said, if he was wrong by a few years.
Also, the Express...
all around the world, you can read every scientific research. Go to the IPCC report. Over 100 scientists from around the world have put their whole careers into doing this. I mean, this is not just a minor undertaking. None of these guys want to deal with the fact that we've hit the limits on the ecosystems. We would all much prefer that we continue business as usual. The fact is that we can't, and we have to face that and get out of our ideological barricades.
So let me. I guess I want to break in here now. I think that we're just be spinning our wheels with just talking about climate change. Hell, for the sake of argument, Daniel. No. Listen. Let me talk now. So for the sake of argument, I just don't care, right? I mean, I think that those problems can be solved if I were to agree that they exist in the exact way that you say they will. I 100% believe that they can get solved and they will get solved. I just believe that our goal toward building the solutions and creating the solutions is much more different than how you characterize it. So for the sake of argument, I'm just going to say, let's just say I agree with you 100% on everything that's going on in regards to global warming. So I'll tell you right off the bat that I'm not in an ideological rut where I automatically disagree with you on global warming. I said that I'm skeptical. I'm not saying that I disagree. And I do recognize that there are problems. I do recognize that there are ecological issues that need to be addressed. But 100% with dire certainty, we cannot address those problems by first putting a gun in people's faces and forcing them to be impassioned about solving those kind of issues. And that's, you said you're an anarchist, and you said you hope that one day we can have a situation where there's no rules, right? I just wrote that down is what you said. So, but if anarchism literally means without rulers, if you're advocating for government solutions right now, you're advocating for rulers. You're advocating that people be forced to share your passions, to share your concern for ecological destruction. But here's the thing, you can't force people to care about the environment. People have to care about the environment of their own volition, Daniel.
I find your whole framing of my perspective to be slightly offensive to begin with. And second of all, it's not a small thing whether we agree that there's a major rupture between.
I'm not saying it's a small thing, Daniel. I'm not.
Because it's part of a whole ideological complex. If you doubt that, if you don't believe that, it also allows you to think, okay, like total wealth accumulation, total private freedom. Let everybody who can afford it eat steak and fly private jets for as long as they want, because really the environment is not in danger. Now, if you recognize that we're actually in a fragile, interdependent system, all life on Earth is in that system, we're cells in this collective body of the Earth and of humanity, then you have to start shifting your perspective. You have to recognize that individual cells, like your liver cells can't invade your pancreas, take all their stuff, And I feel that when you put this, I'm a peaceful person just as you are. I do not want force. I do not want. We went through this already in one debate in Facebook. There are situations where there have to be, for instance, we can't let people destroy the Amazon because our children won't have lives on Earth. So we have to put fences around the Amazon. We have to stop people from deforesting, taking the Amazon jungle and destroying it. It's like the heart of our fucking planet. So there are periods, and it's this, it's like if you're not going to say that we sometimes have to do things to protect the future for our civilization, for our humanity, then you're really looking at a very, very short-term, very, very ideologically fixed view of reality.
So and I actually agree with you that there are a ton of problems that need to be solved, and we absolutely do have to do things to solve those problems. But if you genuinely and authentically believe that these are problems that need to be solved in order to save humanity and to save the world, you don't immediately take a step to contradict that, Daniel, by forcing people at the barrel of a gun, very literally, to engage in those activities. Now, I think you and I would definitely agree, even if
what am I? It's like, stop putting words into my.
That's not putting. You believe? No, I'm not putting words in your mouth. You believe that.
Well, who's going to put up the fence around the Amazon?
Yes, exactly. We would, whatever form it could be that fence could be done through economic incentives, whatever it takes to stop people from doing these things that basically are creating a zero-sum future for humanity.
Well, that's actually kind of why I want to have this discussion a bit, is to think about solutions here, right? So I agree with you that the Amazon's very important. I don't know how important it is to all of our lives. I'm not on that level that you are, that you've looked into all this stuff. However, I totally agree. If the Amazon's gone, that's not very good. How do we rectify that? One thing I find interesting, maybe you can just comment on this, it's just a thought in my head, is there's all these sort of what you call left people in Hollywood that are all millionaires and billionaires, and they all support big government solutions sort of things. Why don't they all buy up large tracts of the Amazon and just take care of it?
Well, I mean, the Amazon is absolutely gigantic. So even if you had billions and billions of dollars, you could only buy an infinitesimal piece of it.
Well, why is it so expensive? Who owns it right now? See, you haven't even thought about that, right? Like that. This is the solutions that we need to be thinking about. Right? That's all I'm saying. And I'll let Sterling carry on or whatever, but I just wanted to throw that, like, let's think about solutions here.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to say, Daniel.
3,000 miles square. I mean, yeah, people can buy little parts of it. And there is, like, I mean, you can look at the Pachamama Alliance. It's a very interesting project to protect what they talk about as the sacred headwaters of the Amazon. I mean, one thing the Amazon also does is that it regulates the whole climate system of the planet. It creates the moisture for the rain and so on. So the Sacred Headwaters Project is an effort to kind of deal with a section in Ecuador and Peru. And we've learned that, like, for instance, some of the best ways to help the Amazon is to let the indigenous people continue their original practices. Because indigenous people actually had a intrinsic relationship with their environments where, for instance, they would actually enhance the health of soil, enhance the biodiversity, and so on. Practices that we in our modern civilization and our hubris and our technological arrogance have actually totally lost.
Yeah, and I agree with all of you guys on this sentiment that we need to do whatever we can in our power to save the Amazon. And, I was just recently watching a docuseries by, it's Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. You've probably seen that before, right? And this isn't the Amazon specifically, but he was talking about the Bufotenin toads of the Sonoran Desert and how they're beginning to disappear because people keep running over the toads because they get frozen in light. So there's some efforts underway to try to save the toads in that environment. This is a different sort of situation, but it's it just brings to light that there are environmental issues that we can step in and try to help solve by various ways. So I'm with you 100% on issues like that, including issues like the Amazon. I just disagree with the way that you want to go about it. And listen, earlier when I said putting a gun to people's throats, my intent wasn't to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to express.
Well, you've developed enough now to recognize that you've developed a very narrow.
Well, can I finish my thought?
That brings everything down to a very certain perspective that you feel comfortable with.
Well, it's called
challenge that entire perspective.
So here's the thing. It's not.
The market itself is often very coercive. When companies are liberated from restrictions, they will pay workers 24 cents an hour, as they did in Haiti. And keep those workers from creating unions. So corporations, private enterprise functions can be just as coercive, just as destructive, just as murderous as state apparatuses. So I think part of the things that I think is just garbage in this whole fucking philosophy is to make the government this ultimate evil. The government, I don't like this government, but the point of it was to create some level of protection between the people and just the extractive, exploitative, dominative, aspects of human nature.
Sure. So here's the thing. One, you're claiming that you're an anarchist, but you're defending government right now, right? So government
made the point, Sterlin. I already made the point.
Listen, there's no need to yell, brother. There's no.
Where you want to go in the utopian sense and where we actually are in the real sense, I'm capable of making that distinction and seeing that we need a transition. Okay, we need a massive educational apparatus.
A transition's fine.
Generative systems, how we build those in community. We're not there yet. Okay, so I make a distinction between an absolute idea of freedom that it would be nice for us to have, and where we are right now as human beings and what we have to fucking deal with.
You know what my sense is? You're shouting a lot right now, and usually that kind of happens. I'm not talking down to you at all here. This is a human sort of a psychological thing. I think that you see this as a threat to your worldview, what Sterling believes, and you're have a bit of like you're getting angry. Like you shouldn't. This is a totally calm discussion here. The fact that you're getting this angry means that you're not being totally rational and logical in thinking about these things. In my opinion, I could be totally wrong. But basically, we're just trying to look at, yeah, go ahead.
So, Jeff, I actually disagree with you there.
Okay.
I feel that anger is something that is an intrinsic human emotion that also doesn't necessarily represent irrationality. It can represent kind of passion and compassion. And in this case, having spoken to Sterlin a number of times and liking him very much on a personal level, very much, I feel that I'm stuck in these ideological constructs that he's created, and therefore it makes me want to push back against it rather than hearing things that I've already heard from him a number of times that I feel are just kind of like rewinding these philosophies and ideologies that I just simply don't believe are correct. So it does create passion in me, and that passion may express itself as anger. And in a way, I feel that sometimes we don't allow ourselves in this society, particularly it's like a masculine thing to always be cold and detached and pretend to have this objectivity rather than really like feeling our heart and feeling what we care about. And for me, this libertarian philosophy that you guys represent is a major obstruction for humanity right now.
That's really interesting you say that, because libertarianism is so small and not really affecting any of the world at this point. So I don't see why you see it as such a big threat.
Well, I think you should check out the book Dark Money by Jane Mayer. Hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars were spent over 35 years in an organized strategic plan in order to get these libertarian ideas. For instance, the idea that there's a conspiratorial they, like a dark force that's sometimes associated with an anti-Semitic association with like the Jewish banking conspiracy, that there's some like ultimate conspiracy behind the government, a deep state, that therefore we need to destroy this government even though we don't know what we're replacing it with, strip away laws, strip away regulations, John Birch Society, Heritage Foundation. Trump is basically a chump of the Heritage Foundation. A lot of his cabinet employees are coming just from them. Steve Bannon, the deep relationship between this whole complex of people who are now running the show in our society and running it into the ground, I would say, and libertarian, right-wing libertarian, anarcho-libertarian thought, and which I would also say, unfortunately, Bitcoin it may be another example of that in practice.
Well, really, to me, anarchism is just the belief that what the word means, right? And without rulers, archy-rulers. And so I don't believe anyone should be slaves, and that's it. And I don't understand. Now, you may have heard a lot of conspiracy theories about how libertarianism was founded or whatever, and maybe that's true. I haven't read that book at all. I have not heard that theory myself. But really, my personal beliefs are quite simple. I just don't think that anyone should be slaves. And I also, with the research I do, you've researched a lot with what you do with your books. I research a lot from the capitalist perspective, and just to let you know, when I say capitalism, I just mean free markets. And it in almost every single case I've ever looked into, and you said we should listen to the scientists on global warming. Okay, well, if you haven't looked into it, I've looked into for decades now every single example of government getting involved in a situation or the market doing in a situation, and I've yet to find one example where the government does a better job of accomplishing something good for humanity than the market does. So yeah, I'll just leave it there. Maybe Sterling, you have something to say he brought up a lot of comments there.
Yeah, well, I was still trying to address what he was saying earlier, but something really did stick out, Daniel, that you said. You said that I have a tendency to narrow down my quote unquote ideology to one specific occurrence or one position. That's right, Daniel, the way you characterized my frame of thought. So yeah, that's just me working from first principles, right? If I want to save the world or I want to engage in some kind of way, if I want to achieve anything socially, I want to make sure from my own personal level, from my heart sense, and from my sense of compassion, that I first don't hurt somebody else in the process. And yeah, I don't mean to offend you when I say you're putting a gun to someone's throat. In a way that's real, but if we advocate for government to solve any kind of problem, we're effectively advocating the initiation of aggression against other people to meet some kind of end. So what I want to do in my personal philosophy is try to cooperate with people in a real way, in a free way, where we can solve all of these kind of issues that you're bringing to bear and that you're putting in very eloquent language. Actually, we just have to be very cautious about the way that we go about it, because there can be a ton of unintended consequences if we're willing to take our measures to the most extreme scenario, which in my opinion is using the power and the nastiness of the state to accomplish those ends. And you're right, Daniel, there does have to be a transition point. I don't believe that philosophical anarchism is going to be accomplished overnight. And there could even be some problems if all of a sudden we woke up tomorrow and there was anarchism, if people didn't actually transition into that phase of thinking. So I realize that it's a multi-generational process. We just have to take some time to educate people that cooperating peacefully is the best course of action before resorting to any kind of violence, especially the violence of government, which is really insidious because it's based on mealy-mouthed, beautiful-sounding rhetoric that conceals the nasty violence that undulates beneath the surface. So we really have to try to move beyond that to solve these kinds of issues. And so yeah, you're right. I do narrow things down to a bottom, low-level form of thinking because it's the simplest way for me to navigate reality without breaking my principles, either on purpose or on accident. And that's the principle, not to first initiate force or violence against another human being in order to solve some type of problem.
Okay, so just to go back to what Jeff said, one thing I find very problematic in this philosophy is this incredibly, kind of sharp dichotomy that you create between, kind of business and government, as if they're not almost always working very closely in tandem, and as if they're, first of all, companies, corporations, businesses are legal entities. The legal code that establishes those entities is part of the governing framework, going back to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the amendments and the legal system. So to make this bizarre separation between governments and markets, it's just not real. All around.
Just briefly, I don't. I'm not in support of corporations. That's a government entity. Well, all I'm saying is that people, general people doing business together. If I have a hamburger stand and you want to eat, and you have some money, and I want the money more than the hamburger, and you want the hamburger more than the money, that's beautiful and that's great. And in fact, in a true free market, every transaction actually benefits both sides. What you're talking about is, when you have a government, this is where it always starts. The evil always starts with the government. Yeah, the big corporations who are really good at business, they'll start to recognize, hey, the government's got all the guns and they can make people do things. I'm going to use them to get them to do things that I want, which includes creating regulations, which create monopolies, which, a lot of the stuff that's going on today in the world, we have governments everywhere in the world today. Every single place in the world has a government, and we still have these problems that you identify. So to me, the root cause of most of it is government. Now, of course, greed and people will, in the market, if we have a true free market, there's always going to be problems, absolutely. But I can't see McDonald's bombing Syria and killing 500,000 kids because they want to sell hamburgers. It's just not going to happen. But yes, if you have the government, and this is one little thing I just want to drop in your subconscious here a little bit is, the movie The Lord of the Rings or the book The Lord of the Rings, that ring of power is the ring of power. That's basically what government is, and no one can handle that power. And that's why if we can somehow, and as Sterlin said, this isn't going to happen overnight, get that power down or get rid of it completely, we'll have much less problems. We'll have much more chance of fixing all these things that you want to fix in the world.
So for me, from my perspective is quite different. I think a lot of the reasons that we have wars in the Middle East are because our most powerful industries on the planet are the fossil fuel industries that are seeking to extract the mineral resources of those regions. Yeah,
I know what you're going to say because I've heard this argument before, but
the Amazon, a lot of that is to create soybean plantations, to feed the cows for the hamburgers.
Sure.
And then, in terms of what the actual solutions are, you libertarians are not going to like them because it's going to require an effort, a species-wide effort at self-limitation. Like, for instance, if we really look at what's happening ecologically, we may have to recognize that we just can't have, meat-heavy diets anymore. And we're actually going to have to somehow, whether it's voluntarily or not, convince a huge number of people on the planet that they can't eat so much meat. Like maybe they can eat meat once a week, maybe once a month. We're going to have to say the jet plane. Every time we fly a jet plane, it's 1,000 tons of CO2. It's like one of the biggest amounts of CO2 that we use, is from flying. I mean, we have just a problem here. We're in like a chamber that's running out of oxygen.
Are you vegan?
We're arguing about whether gases exist or not.
Are you vegan?
I'm not. I have been vegetarian at different points.
Okay, so you're not even willing to take the steps yourself to fix these problems. Do you ever fly on planes?
I have done it in the past, and I was vegetarian for a year and a half, and I noticed that my personal effort was having no impact on the larger issue. So my sense is the only way you could have a larger impact would be to create some type of collective momentum where people would take a pact together, where we'd all say, we all want to preserve the future for humanity, so we'll all agree not to travel so much, not to eat meat, and so on. I don't think an individual on their own doing much does anything. It has to be a larger collective initiative, which we do have the technology, like the internet technology could help us create those larger social contracts.
Yeah, it's a different way of looking at things because to me, it really starts with you changing, right? And if you're flying on airplanes, you just said these are major problems and you're doing them, right? So if you're not even willing to change your life, I know what you're saying, that if you just stop flying, you're not going to save the world. I understand that.
I only fly basically because I'm invited to mostly give talks or meet with somebody.
Sure, but you're basically saying we have to stop people from doing this, but you're doing it.
So I wouldn't have met Sterlin, which means we wouldn't be having this, hopefully, productive, if a little bit, kind of irksome debate that we're having.
Well, you know what? You say that libertarianism is quite dangerous. In fact, we're talking about a lot of these changes that need to be sort of made by humanity that start with you. And actually, the vegan movement is absolutely massive in the anarchist community. Like that's like I think there's about half the people at our conference are vegans, and they're very attuned and they're very we don't want to destroy this world whatsoever. But they're trying to make the change from themselves. And I'll just follow up on all that Sterling talk, because this is supposed to be sort of a conversation between the two of you. When you mentioned about how corporations are bombing the Middle East, it's actually the governments are bombing, but yes, it's on behalf of the corporations. But the problem is the government, not so much the businesses. Because, for example, I'll just give you one example and then I'll shut up here. Let me just give the one example just real quick. And then you can talk as long as you want. If ExxonMobil was bombing Iraq for years and years, killing 500,000 kids, which who was that? Madeleine Albright said, "Oh, it was all worth it." A lot of people would stop filling up their cars at ExxonMobil, so people can actually just vote with their money. Like I personally, if I knew ExxonMobil was actually directly bombing people to get the oil, I'd be like, well, I'm not going to buy my gas from them. Who's got some gas that's like they're not killing people to get, right? So the real problem comes with government, and that was my point, and you can go ahead and talk.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I just feel that's a very naive perspective because it really misses how integrated companies, corporations, and government are. Now, I know you said you're against corporations. I'm just not sure what that means. I'd have to explore that more with you because most of the goods that we deal with in the world today are based on massive distributed supply chains that.
Yeah, but you can have that without corporations. The reason I say I'm against corporations is because it's a government creation.
You can have like an Apple computer. You want to let me speak. You said we can have like an Apple computer, for instance, without a corporation?
Yeah, absolutely. A corporation is just an entity created by the government with special rules, special rights, actually, which I'm not for. A corporation is thought of under the legal structure of a government as being a person. And it's actually a person with limited liability. So all these corporations, they're all called limited liability corporations. They're actually given rights they shouldn't be given. They should be liable for every single thing they do, just like we are. But in fact, government creates these things. As you pointed out, yes, when you have government, these two things will definitely, and they always have, merge in one form or another. It's called fascism.
Yeah, fascism is a term. The Austrian economists also described what we have in current society as a mixed economy, where governments get involved with businesses, and then they provide those businesses with special privileges and legal monopolies. And that's all. And also, we know when businesses, these large corporations that all of us agree are nasty, especially some of these large, massive, super complex banks, whenever they start to go under, their buddies in the government actually bail them out and save them from going under. In a real free market environment, there wouldn't be that safety net of a government to bail you out if you're doing nasty and ugly things and harming people. So we know in the financial collapse of 2007, 2008, all these companies, including some of the major automobile companies, the banks, they were all going under. And as soon as they started to go under, they just hollered at their government buddies to give them some help and bail them out. So thus, trillions of dollars in bailout money was issued to these companies because they were allegedly too big to fail. So I don't believe in this idea of helping prop up corporations that are failing, probably because they're doing evil and they're in cahoots with government. So we all agree with that. What we want as anarchists is an absolutely free market. Free market implies that government is not involved in that scenario at all and doesn't actually exist. All these things that we're concerned with or that we need to happen in reality businesses can crop up and
absolutely free market. Who protects workers' rights?
So
the market.
Environmental rights.
Yeah. So yeah,
It's just competition, right? So if I have a hamburger stand and you have a hamburger stand and I'm paying 50 cents and you go, oh, I'm a greedy capitalist, I want to beat and destroy his business, I'm going to pay 55 cents and get all his best employees. Now all of a sudden it's competition. It actually this is how human history has always worked out. It's like the reason that we have a lot of the wealth we have today, and actually I'm a very anti-materialist, by the way, I'm a minimalist. I actually don't like having a lot of stuff, but I do enjoy being able to have this conversation over the internet and all that kind of stuff. Technology is quite useful in some ways, but the competition in the markets always, as long as there is competition, that's the thing. We've never really had free markets. Like truly free markets. And we're actually trying to create a few. Just so you know, there's a country called Liberland that's going to be a narco-capitalist country in Europe. We're trying seasteading. Basically, what it's come down to, I think, is we need to show people like yourself that these things work. But we've never really been truly allowed to do that because we can't. Yeah, that's right.
Not free. Yeah, and what I was going to get at, I mean, there's a lot of different possible solutions for any given.
If you have the opportunity, you'll realize that the fantasy doesn't work.
So here's the thing.
We've never been able to try.
Yeah, there's never been now there has been like quasi-free societies, like Gaelic Ireland was quasi-free, had a system of sureties, and the judges were all private. And that civilization particularly lasted for 2,000 years. Some people think they would just fail like immediately and then it would die off. But it was go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the ideas that I advance in my book, How Soon Is Now, which of course I would love you guys to read, is, and I know I would be curious to read your book about the occult aspects of the monetary system, Shimai, I think it's called. If we could see that humanity as a whole in its integration with the planetary ecology is like a kind of superorganism, then we would see that corporations as they are now are something like the nascent organs in that collective superorganism. So for instance, an energy company is like the circulation system that gets blood through the body. A media company is like the perceptual mechanisms that take raw data and transmit into memes and narratives that the whole body then functions accordingly. A sanitation company is like the liver or kidney or something like that of the nascent planetary organism that breaks down waste matter. But the problem is that, I looked in a book called Spontaneous Evolution, which was written by a cell biologist, Bruce Lipton, and a political philosopher.
I have that book.
And they talk about how when we look at physical evolution, there's a movement between competition and domination, cooperation, symbiosis. And then ultimately cooperation and symbiosis wins out. So for instance, our bodies are examples of cooperative systems. Like we're 90% not even human organisms, DNA. We have all these, it's an incredible, thing that's developed out of symbiosis over millions of years of evolution. So the sort of, you have a competitive and aggressive system, and as it matures, it either dies out or it's going to mutate into something cooperative. So from that sense, you could see the possibility for what we now call corporations, if we were to fundamentally redesign our financial system, could be something like the those organs, those non-competing but actually self-supporting organs in the body. But to make that transition, we would have to fundamentally redesign the economic system so that it's not just about monetary profit, it's equally about the health and resilience of natural systems and the health and sort of elevation of human communities.
Yeah, so this is that's a beautiful thing that you said, Daniel. And, clearly you have some qualms with this, but I think that we're already working on that. We're in the process of doing that by creating these decentralized systems like cryptocurrency, competing blockchains.
We don't have time to get into this, but we could talk about it again. But I think there's a lot of problems with the whole, like for instance, I think if I go down this rabbit hole, it's going to be another 4 hours that we're going to be on here. But Bitcoin. When you look at what's called the Gini coefficient, about wealth inequality, like Bitcoin is terrible. Under 1,000 individuals own more than half of Bitcoin. They were the ones who got it early, often because they had private wealth and time, so it just came to them, and they invest a few $1,000s or whatever, and so then they hit the jackpot, and then if you look at its decentralization, actually the huge mining concerns are a big threat to that, because you could have a 51% attack now, where you might have one mining concern or a couple in a coalition, so then ultimately, once again, you're going to be left with governance problems, and I think that's what the sad fact is, that ultimately you have to go back to governance problems. And then we do have, that's what government is, unfortunately. It's like a history of, well, how do we create, what's a Bill of Rights for people? What's a constitution? How do we create a separation of powers? These things were not all done just to screw everybody. They were done in some idealistic way to figure out how a human society could work together. And to just say we're going to smash all of that and substitute untrammeled market forces, I think you're going to be, if you get a chance to test that out, I think you're going to be into a very rude awakening.
Here's one of the really beautiful things about cryptocurrency that kind of, I hope, helps answer some of your concerns. So when you said it's going to have the similar problems that we already have with government.
Well, it already does.
Right. No, here's one of the beautiful things, though, Daniel. What do you think would happen if you tried to fork the United States federal government? Somebody's going to shoot you, or you're going to wind up in a prison cell forever. You can actually fork a cryptocurrency if you disagree with the fundamentals of how that governance model is functioning. And this is absolutely amazing, because it gives us, or provides us with the impetus to try to work out our problems in a truly civilized fashion by upgrading the protocol to align with whatever our group's specific vision is. If you try to fork the federal government because you have a different vision on how society will work, those entrenched power structures are going to stop you, and they're going to stop you with violence if they have to. So what the decentralized technologies allow us to do is to build governance models that make sense for us as groups who have different values, competing visions, a different understanding of how value systems should work.
I'm in a room in my workspace here, and I have to vacate it, so we're going to have to cut this off for now. But I think it would be great to talk about that more at another time. And yes, but what you're just saying in a way supports what I'm saying to my perspective, which is that, it's going to be about evolving new governance structures. And to do that, you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to have to go back to the history of governance structures, whether it's how America created this government, or how the Iroquois Confederacy, meshed together native tribes. They didn't kill each other all the time. That's what the history of governance structures is. So just to reject all of that is very naive.
Well, it's not a rejection. Just one last thought.
Can you just let me do this, Sterling? You have to go. Just tell them 30 seconds and you can go. I just want to say one last thing. If you care about the world and the ecology a lot, the thing you should be looking at is central banking. It has been the destroyer of so many things in this world. If it weren't for central banking, and this is why crypto is so important, because they can print up money at will.
The ideological bulwark of the whole philosophy. And as I said, I think there's issues with that, which is once again, I'm not a fan of the current system at all, but I think just to say that we're going to toss that, it's just problematic. But
well, we're already tossing it. It's already gone.
At a future time.
Okay, great. Thank you for coming on. We'll let you go, and Sterling and I will just finish up here without you.
Sure.
Thank you, Daniel, for joining us.
Okay.
And we're closed on his laptop. There we go. So Sterling, we got a few minutes here to kind of wrap up. It's kind of unfair without having him here to respond, but he had to leave because someone else had already privately booked that room and voluntarily agreed to that time, and he voluntarily agreed to leave, which is great. He was living anarchy right there. Any final thoughts, Sterling, on what he was saying there?
Well, I think Daniel's one of those people who are on the cusp of recognizing that there are some problems with sort of his train of thought. Like, he's already identifying as an anarchist, or as you pointed out earlier, Jeff, he's identifying with some of these other movements, be it veganism, etc., but he hasn't actually made the leap to maintain a certain level of consistency with those values that he's articulating. So I think that maybe he's on the path to coming to terms with these ideas. And my hope is that it'll just take some time to be able to embrace that. But by the same token, a lot of the things that he's saying, I wouldn't absolutely disagree with. I just briefly mentioned about being skeptical about anthropogenic global warming, and he went off on a whole tangent about, I can't believe that you think this way, you libertarians and your ideology. I didn't say that I absolutely disagreed with whatever he was saying.
Yeah, he's obviously incredibly passionate about what he believes with that, and is not open to other people's thoughts on it. And he really kind of lashed out there for a second. He seemed to kind of get it together after that, so that was good. But yeah, I could have gone on and on about my research into global warming, and yeah, I could be totally wrong. But like, I didn't even have time to mention this. The Express UK newspaper just came out. Ice age warning, North Atlantic conditions will have dramatic impact on climate, say experts. Now, I don't care, they're mainstream media, whatever. They've had this ice age, this global warming go back and forth. It was only like 50 years ago they were warning everyone of an ice age. Anyway, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've gotten all the wrong information. But we agreed to that, right? We actually said, hey, let's just agree that you're right. We don't totally think you're right, but let's just, for the sake of this debate or argument or conversation, let's agree you're right. And then he got really angry. And the other thing I found that, again, this is very unfair to Daniel. If you're watching this now, you laugh, so we're talking about it. If you were here, I would say that is that. Yeah, he calls himself an anarchist, but then he kept saying things, and he was really kind of angry about it. He's like, you guys and your ideology is going to destroy the world. It's like, well, but you say you're an anarchist. He's got some
cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty, and this is pretty common with a lot of people, especially if they're on the sort of the left end of thinking in terms of anarchism. And I'm already of the mindset that I can work with, that we can all work with any of these individuals and cooperate with them to build the societies that we want to live in. But in order to maintain the society, we do have to have some consistency of thought, I think, and an understanding of the non-aggression principle and actually what anarchism means. If we have an understanding of what it means, we're more likely to engage in activities that make it more of a reality.
Yeah, it was really interesting as well to hear him how he described you having principles as being very naive and simplistic. Just the fact that you say, well, I just start with, I don't want to hurt anybody. And he's like, well, that's naive and simplistic. It's like, how is that naive? Well, I guess it is simplistic. I guess that's true. It's very simple. It's very... I guess maybe even you could say naive from his viewpoint, but like the fact that he's really angry about it, and the fact that this is what I found interesting about one of the things I found very interesting was that he was seeing us as the problem. It's like we're like so small. Anarchists are like less than 1%. Like people who actually understand what anarchy is and actually understand the philosophy is less than 1% of the population. All these problems that he's describing are all done by statists. But he seems to think we're the problem. That's really bizarre to me. That's some sort of cognitive dissonance where he can't quite put the two together, and it kind of just computes, and he just like lashes out at us because he. I don't know. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great point. And I'm having a lot of difficulty putting that together as well, because we're actually on the same page with Daniel in the sense that we're trying to find the most expedient and efficient solutions and most peaceful solutions to these kind of problems. Sure, me personally, I'm not as interested in the ecological concerns because I don't think it's a priority. I think abolishing government and getting people to realize that using violence to solve problems is not healthy. It won't help maintain a healthy society. In order to maintain a healthy society, and this will fall right into his ecological concerns, we have to be able to cooperate and work together as peacefully as possible. If we can't do that, we're not going to be able to solve all of these problems. Because I think Daniel wants everyone to be as impassioned as him, and I've told him this before, about his ecological concerns, but you can't force people into being compassionate or impassioned about certain subjects. They have to come to terms with that themselves and come to understand it. So I think we all agree that leveraging educational resources in terms of, things like his book, How Soon Is Now, are all very important for getting people to understand the depth of, say, an ecological crisis. But to put a gun to someone's head to solve that problem, he really did get upset when I said put a gun to someone's head. But when you advocate for government, that's effectively what you're doing. So we have to be very conscious that those aren't effective solutions, because it contradicts our goal of trying to save the world.
Yeah, and that's so typical of a lot of statists, is that when you point out that these laws and regulations and all that stuff is pointing a gun to people's head, they don't see it that way, because they've been sort of conditioned their entire lives to think that's just normal, that's just that's government, and that's what they do. It's like, yeah, but there shouldn't be government, that sort of a thing. The other thing that I found really interesting is, I was trying to figure out some solutions here, just like you. I don't want the Amazon to go away. I don't want this ocean out there to boil my skin when I jump into it. I don't want any of that. I'd like to see this, and it's actually raining here today. One of the only days of the year it rains. Yeah, but normally it's nice. It'll be super green tomorrow after this rain. So I'm going to look at the green and really like it. But it was really interesting, because I said, why don't all these like billionaire, rich Hollywood leftists buy up a lot of the Amazon? And you could tell that he had never thought about it. And then he said, well, it'd be too expensive. And I'm like, well, who owns it? And he hadn't even really thought about that. I'm going to guess, I don't know. I'm going to guess that those governments say they own those areas. So it'd be the Venezuelan, the Colombian, Brazil, and whatever else. I'm not expert on the Amazon.
I think you're right. At least some parts of it are definitely owned by the state to some degree, and like a national part of it.
And it is being deforested, and that is not a very good thing for humanity in general. But what's actually causing it? Well, who's the owners right now? The government. And all we're saying is, why don't we find a way to make that privatized? But he hadn't even thought about that. So hopefully, Danny, if you're watching this, that's actually a real solution here. Why don't we really try to work to get people to realize the Amazon's really important, and try to get at least some of it to get privatized, and definitely encourage a lot of people who really care, who have a lot of money, to buy up parts of that forest and just leave it as is, or take care of it, or Donald Trump can rake it or whatever to make sure there's no fires.
And you're absolutely right, Jeff. And we know that if it's privatized, that it's going to be salvaged, because when government owns it and it's put in sort of this situation where it's in the commons, you have the tragedy of the commons that crops up, where no one's incentivized to actually take care of the forest. So it's no wonder they're okay with just rampantly deforesting parts of the Amazonian jungle, because no one's incentivized to do anything to protect it.
Yeah, the tragedy of the commons is just, just so simple and so obvious that a lot of people just miss. And a lot of people get really emotional about it. And you can see Daniel gets emotional about these topics. And, I've said in the past, I'll be at a conference and I'll just mention we should just privatize the oceans. And you'll see some people just get like, they want to kill me. And it's like, well, the oceans are a mess right now. And it's all sort of government sort of related. They have control over those areas. Again, this brings me to the point, Sterlin, where I really think we have to find ways to get our own areas and prove these concepts. And that could be Liberland, that could be seasteading, or various other ways that we can do it. Because really, they're never going to believe us until they see it. Because it's really hard for them to understand, because they've had all their lives, especially the left sort of people, that, these capitalists, they're destroying everything. And yeah, in a sense they are, because they're working with the government, and that's what capitalists are going to do. I wouldn't personally, because I'm a anarcho-capitalist, but your average statist capitalist, it's like, if I give this congressman $1 million, I'm going to make $20 million, and he's going to buy all my bombs.
It's a skewed incentive structure, right, Jeff? Right. You know about as well as I do. If a company knows that they can use the government to gain a market advantage, they're incentivized to do that. The only companies who won't do that are ones who are strongly principled in their actions. As a matter of fact, we just wrote, a friend of ours at Bitcoin.com just wrote an article for us. We just rejected a government handout from an unnamed government that was recently going to provide us with an opportunity to expand. And that article is on news.bitcoin.com. So yeah, only the really principled capitalists, the principled free market entrepreneurs are not going to accept.
Well, actually, that's a whole other topic that we could discuss just as really briefly here. If the U.S. government said they're going to give me $100 million and they just want me to expand my business, I'll accept it. Why not? But I won't use their, because actually that kind of helps to get money away from them, right? Like I want them to go bankrupt. Like even if I was in the U.S. and I could apply for welfare, I wouldn't, because I'm a very much anarcho-capitalist who's always working to create value. So I would never be at an income level where I would need welfare or even be applicable for it. But if I was under some circumstance, yeah, I would totally take their money. Ayn Rand took their money. Just take it away from them. Get it. It's so bad when they have it. It can never be worse than when they have it. When they have it, they're going to be bombing people, oppressing people, putting people in cages, extorting them. When we have it, at least, we don't do those things as much. So
no, fair point, Jeff. And I mean, also, a lot of people begrudge Ayn Rand for taking Social Security money from the state, toward the end of her life, but she had already had a shit ton of money stolen from her throughout her whole life. What's wrong with if you have the opportunity to take some of that money back? You don't want to do that too.
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with anyone who takes money from the government. Actually, I wish everyone would, and that's even this refugee sort of thing. People are like, oh, they're going to bankrupt the government. It's like, okay, good, good. We got to get rid of this thing. All the problems that Daniel believes are problems could all be solved if we can get rid of governments and central banks. But he doesn't believe that will work. So one of the things, like I said, we have to find better ways to show these things work and just get out there more. And Roger Ver, who you work with, he wanted to, I haven't heard anything lately, but he was talking about buying an island and making it basically an anarchist sort of a place. I don't know if he's done much on that lately, but that Liberland seasteading, we just need to keep going, keep getting this information out there. That's crucial. And then keep putting these things into application in real life and be able to show people. So, because if we could show Daniel, we can say, hey, Liberland, if Liberland turns into a real country and it's basically anarchist, and within 10 years, it's got lush greenery everywhere, it's got no pollution, it's like pristine, we can go, well, look, that's anarchy right there. And he'll have to go, he'll try to find some reason why, whatever, but he'll at least have to admit, okay, maybe you're right on that one or something like that. And we just have to keep doing that until we get enough people to realize what's going on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeff. And it's a beautiful thing because we're actually in that transition phase.
Yeah, we are.
Already, with homesteading cropping up, with free private cities that Titus Goebel, I think, is promoting.
Oh, yeah.
VIT, Jet League, of course, in Liberland. I mean, sure, this is the very early stages of this process of trying to create these free societies, but we are doing it right now. This is something that's happening, and it's not something I think that's decades away. It's something that's right on our doorstep, and it will be here, and we will start experimenting with government. In a way, just with blockchain technologies, we're already in a phase of doing experimental governance models that are based on an opt-in and voluntary measure, and that's happening literally right now. And we've seen that just recently with the Bitcoin Cash fork. Forking is not an ugly, bad thing. To branch off because you have philosophical disagreements on different value structures, the ability to branch off without killing each other is so extremely vital for our future growth and development. It shows us that we can work together, even if it requires us branching off and splitting and creating our own networks and factions.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a final comment that I kind of sort of was thinking about as we were doing that conversation is that you have been into psychedelics a lot, and he as well, and that's where you guys really get along. But a lot of the people who've done psychedelics, they usually get to a point where they're kind of like, we're all one. You kind of like this sort of harmony, this sort of peacefulness, that happens to a lot of people as they do those sort of things. But he didn't seem to have a lot of that. So has he done a lot of psychedelics, or does he just write about it?
From what I understand, he has done a lot, and he has said the most, or the ones that he said he's done are I know he's done ayahuasca, maybe iboga, and a couple of different ones. But this doesn't completely surprise me, Jeff. I know that there's a lot of psychedelic psychonauts in our communities, in the anarchist ecosystems, who have these values. But I have met a lot of psychonauts and people into psychedelics who don't necessarily share our values in terms of anarchism. I think using psychedelics is a good step in the right direction, but I don't think it will de facto make somebody anarchist. It certainly helps. Like
No, I wouldn't say it turned them into an anarchist per se, but, I was just, a lot of the people who've done all of these things, they end up being quite a bit more open, quite a bit more peaceful, quite a bit more like we should all get along sort of a thing. That seems to be the general sort of theme of these medicines, what they kind of evoke in a lot of people, but he didn't seem to quite have a lot of that.
Yeah, didn't evoke that. Yeah, I guess sort of his passion flares up and it gets really angry and kind of loses it in the moment, which granted can happen to the best of us.
He seems a little like frazzled, like we actually, Daniel, like we're not doing this behind your back. You logged off. I would have said a lot of these things if you were still here. If you're here, Daniel, you can post in the comments. Jeff, that's BS what you just said. That's fine.
Round two.
Yeah, I don't know if we need a round two right away, but I'm too busy. But I think that was good. But he almost canceled because he spilled coffee on his laptop this morning, and then on the second time that we were supposed to do this, he canceled again. He said something, and then when he logged on to Zoom, he's like running through a hallway to get into that conference room, and he looks just frazzled, and then we're talking about peace and love related things, and he starts shouting, and it's like, that doesn't vibe with the psychedelic sort of angle of things. I think he's got to, yeah, he's got to relax. He's got to do some meditation or something. I think, if I were, this is sort of a defense of him. It appears he really believes we're on the cusp of extinction. It appears to be what he believes, and it could be true. And actually, from my perspective, it's like, well, if that's what the universe is going to do, that's what it's going to do. Like, I'm very like peace and love. Like, what can I do about it? Like in the next 2 years to like fix it all. I don't think I can fix the whole world in 2 years. So, what am I going to do? But it seems like it's almost like pressing on him. Like, and he's like, we've got to fix this now or we're all going to die. It's like, relax, take some breaths, like we're going to find ways through. And if we don't, we're going to die. No big deal. What's,
part of existence, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. And you nailed his perspective. As a matter of fact, his whole book, 2012, it's been years since I read it, but 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, is essentially an extinction manifesto that has spiritual.
Yeah, I definitely saw that. Yeah, he really seems to believe we're all going to die in like 5 years, and maybe we will, but I kind of doubt it.
Same.
But what's the point of even living if you're going to live in this frazzled state and you're freaked out the whole time, you're living in fear? Like, it's the psychedelic side I don't see in them so much. Like, a lot of psychedelic people would be like, well, they'd just be like this, that's, if we're going to die, we're going to die, whatever. But he seems... Yeah, I think there is a cognitive dissonance in his head, and I think we kind of saw that. And it's no offense, Daniel, if you're watching. Like, everyone's got cognitive dissonance, but there's something, you've got two things in you fighting inside, and it really, you need to figure it out a little bit. And
I think that really, really came out during this discussion.
Yeah, only for your own good, that live happier, have a happier life, and be more relaxed and that sort of thing. So anyway, Daniel's not here, but I'd like to thank him for coming on. I thought that was very interesting. And Sterling, I'd like to thank you for coming on. It's always a pleasure. Is there anything you want to let people know? Any final thoughts? Any plugs you want to give?
Yeah, sure. So if anybody's familiar with my material, or if you're not familiar, I just started my website that has some of my business aspects on it, plus a place where anyone can invite me to speak at a conference. I do a lot of cryptocurrency conferences, of course, but also Anarchist Conference. It's sterlinlujan.com. And then my Facebook page is just Sterlin Lujan, and anybody can come visit. I do a lot of Facebook posts, and we also have very lively, inspirited discussion. So please come on and do that. But I just want everyone to remember that when we're thinking about any of these problems in society, that we always have to start at first principles. I'm not a utilitarian. I do not believe in the idea that the ends justifies the means. We have to make conscious moral decisions in the moment in our day-to-day lives as we move through it to make sure we don't hurt anybody else. And if the situation gets more complex, or if a person views it as more complex, we have to simplify it as much as possible along the lines of the non-aggression principle, along the lines of compassion.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And always a pleasure to talk to you, Sterlin. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share down below, especially if a lot of your ecological type friends, what do they call them? Tree huggers. There's other words for them. Greenies, I guess. No offense. Those are just words that I've heard used with people who are really like, that's their focus. And great. I hope the people who care about the ecology do great, and I hope the ecology's good. I want clean water. I want fresh air. He was talking like we're going to run out of air in like 5 years. He actually said that. I don't think we can grow our own trees and stuff. But anyway, no need to panic.
Right? Don't panic, as Douglas Adams said.
Even if so, whatever. I'm so I just let the universe do what the universe is going to do, and all I can do, and this is what I was trying to relate to him a little bit, is do my best. And so I think my best is trying to get this information out there. My best is taking care of myself physically, mentally, spiritually, and my family, and my friends, and my community wherever I happen to live, and that sort of a thing, and it all kind of just flows from there. And he calls it sort of naive or simplistic, but it really does. It flows, and once you start to change the people around you. And with his sort of frame of mind or thing, he's not going to convince a lot of people in person too much to change, because they're going to look at him and go, well, he doesn't seem very happy, so why would I want to be like him, and that sort of a thing. So yeah, I don't even know what I'm getting at there, but I guess basically I'm getting at, if we run out of air in 5 years, then we run out of air in 5 years, and if that's actually true, let's figure out some ways we can not do that. And, if that happens, then we're gone. And that's it. No problem.
Right. It happens, it happens.
If it happens, it happens.
It was a good run.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. A little too statist for my liking this time around on this earth. But there's some beautiful things, beautiful flowers, beautiful dogs, kids, and love, when you fall in love for the first time. Yeah, all that stuff's good. But yeah, so I'll let you go, Sterling. This has been way too long, but it was really interesting. So if you put in the comments below if you found this interesting, if you'd like to see us do more things like this. I've mostly just done interview format. If you got questions and comments, debate it out in the comments below. Share with your greenie friends. They'll get in there and tell us we're all naive and simple, and we should really just put up a big fence around the Amazon. It's like, well, go ahead, put a fence. I'm not stopping you. But the governments there will stop you, I'm pretty sure. So you'll find out who your real enemy is then. So yeah, that's it for Anarchast. I'll just mention Anarchapulco coming up February 14th to 17th. Lots of these sort of people, lots of, not so much Daniel kind of people, but more Sterlin kind of people, talking about real solutions, real things, real ways we can make both your own life and the rest of the world better. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.